Brethren, the presentation I've chosen today from Solomon is in fact a demonstration in which we'll be exploring the working tools of all 3 degrees, the background, origin, role and symbolic significance of the working tools, both in operative masonry and speculative masonry. So before we continue, brethren, can we just imagine for a moment that we are in a lodge room which is open, and we're now going to have a demonstration involving the working tools of all 3 degrees, and I'll be acting as the narrator. So, the working tools form a very familiar part of the furniture in all our lodges, symbols of which every mason knows at least a little, having had them presented to him as he progressed through his ceremonies, different tools to symbolize the different stages of our progress on our journeys of discovery. Working tools are always on view. They are displayed as soon as the lodge is open for business and are not put away until after the lodge has been closed. Like the volume of the sacred law, they are an essential part of our Masonic symbolism. In addition to being presented with the working tools in all 3 craft degree ceremonies, very often the first piece of ritual that a new brother learns after being raised is to present the working tools to the worshipful master at installation, or to a fellow brother in a ceremony. In some lodges, an entered apprentice presents the first degree working tool shortly after his own initiation. This is a perfect introduction to the learning progress and to the work on the floor. There can be no doubt, therefore, that the working tools are central to our ritual, forming a double connection. First, they form direct and obvious link between speculative masonry and operative masonry. In the words of the ritual, but as we are not all operative masons, but rather free and accepted or speculative. Second, they provide a direct link between all the degrees, as an explanation of them is an integral and critical part of each degree ceremony. They are presented to the candidate at the end of each ceremony, possibly because the explanation encapsulates the symbolic message of the degree in a few memorable words. Although it is normal practice to change the working tools as the lodge opens in the different degrees, some older lodges display the working tools of all 3 degrees at all times. In Bristol, the working tools of the degree to be worked that evening are laid out by the tiler at the beginning of the evening, and are not changed as the degree changes. But, whatever the variations, the working tools are always displayed when a lodge is open. Our ancient operative brethren were skilled artisans who constructed the great medieval buildings that still stand today, including cathedrals, castles and palaces. Although the Anglo-Saxons built with stone, it was after the Norman conquest that one of the greatest building booms in English history took place. If we remember that the population of England at that time was probably no more than 1.5 million, the scope of this building boom is even harder for us to understand. The resources that were put into this great construction boom were enormous, and it reminds us that the skills of the masons and their craft were held in special esteem in the life of the nation. The working tools they used were an essential ingredient to the craft of masonry, and held an importance far greater than our present perception of hand tools could possibly hold for us. When the writers of our ritual were looking for a link between the 3 degree ceremonies, they chose tools, the most important aids to the medieval mason, as the most suitable theme for the very important moral lessons they wanted to convey through the 3 degrees, making the progress of the mason on his journey of discovery. The working tools were selected for their suitability to each degree, as well as for their overall progressive symbolism that we shall now see. Now, as the narrator, brethren, I would address a brother and invite that brother, assisted by the director of ceremonies or his assistant in the northeast corner, to present those working tools to the lodge. When that was completed, I would then say again, as narrator, the first degree working tools are the 24-inch gauge, the common gavel and the chisel. These are the tools of the entered apprentice who has been accepted as someone deemed suitable to learn the skills needed and capable of progressing to the higher skills. If he did not prepare the stone correctly, the work could not continue. We must, therefore, never think of the entered apprentice as some sort of unskilled medieval building labourer. His skills were fundamental skills. Accordingly, the working tools of the first degree teach us not only the skills of the apprentice, but also some fundamental things about the use of our most precious asset, time. What to do with it, as well as not what to do with it. And they also point out that education is the central foundation of what the ritual describes as regularly organized society. The point is as valid today as it was then. Now, as the narrator brethren, I would now invite another brother to present the second degree working tools to the lodge, and again he would be assisted by the director of ceremonies or the assistant. Following that, the narrator would take over again. The second degree working tools are the square, level and plumb rule, the tools of the fellowcraft. This second degree is sometimes considered to be less important than the others, squeezed between the initiation and the raising. Yet, this is to misunderstand it. The ceremony is indeed shorter, but that is because a lot of the content was transferred to the third degree when it was established in about 1725. In learned societies and universities, a fellow is a high rank, and in operative masonry it signified a mason who was qualified and able to do the work. The working tools of this degree are of a higher level than those of the first degree, as they are structural tools for enabling the edifice. Without the square and level, the foundations and floor could not be laid, and without the plumb rule, nothing could be raised above the ground. The symbolic meaning of the working tools likewise guides our reflections to the basis of our conduct towards all our fellow human beings, and not just to fellow Masonic brethren. The shorter version of the explanation of the second degree working tools omits a lot of reasoning behind the meaning. The long explanation includes phrases such as, "The level demonstrates that we are all sprung from the same stock, partakers of the same nature, and sharers of the same hope," and the infallible plumb rule, which, like Jacob's ladder, connects heaven and earth, is the criterion of rectitude, or as we would perhaps know it in modern times, moral correctness, and truth. It teaches us to work uprightly before God and man. Although these and other phrases are omitted from the short version, we find in both versions some of the best-known phrases in Masonry today. Thus, the square teaches morality, the level equality, and plumb rule justness and uprightness of life and actions. And remember that in the initiation ceremony the candidate is told, "Stand perfectly erect, your feet formed in a square, your body thus being considered an emblem of your mind, and your feet of the rectitude of your actions." As the narrator, I would now turn to a third brother, assisted again by the director, our assistant director of ceremonies, and invite that brother, would you now present the third degree tools to the lodge? And on completion of that presentation, as narrator, I would then say, the third degree working tools, the skirt, the pencil, and the compasses, are the tools of the master, or architect, or designer of the building, and refer to the skills of intellect, conception, and execution, without which there would be no framework within which to apply the more artisan skills promulgated in the former degrees. In the practical world of the operative mason, he may have known how to square a stone, how to raise a column, how to create a level, but the decision of the site, the height, the proportions of the edifice was in the hands of the architect or master. Morally, working tools of the third degree extend the principles of the first two degrees, but now they talk of our ultimate relationship with God and how our behaviour should always be predicted with eternity in view. They point us to the volume of the sacred law and, by implication, all that it teaches us. However, the 9 working tools as presented are not their only representation in the lodge. Let us not forget that the square and compasses are always present with the volume of the sacred law on the worshipful master's pedestal. The jewels of the master and senior and junior wardens, the square, level and plumb rule, are the second degree working tools, always visible, whatever the degree, and act as a reminder that in earlier times there were only 2 degrees in masonry. These are just 2 of the tools and other symbolic objects to be found at all times in our lodges. The overall picture teaches us that the practical skills illustrated by the working tools in the 3 degrees harmonize together to make the building possible. For although it is the skill of the architect that gives conception to the structure, it cannot be raised without the operative skills of the stone squarer and column raiser. Together they make a whole, and together the symbolic lessons we learn from the working tools make sense as a moral structure to underpin our lives. In our lodges we superficially construct, in order to emulate it, King Solomon's temple at Jerusalem in its outward form. But the real purpose is the symbolic construction of the virtual temple within ourselves and personified in our daily life. The working tools in all 3 degrees are constituent parts of that purpose and essential waymakers on our Masonic journey. Even today, apprentice stonemasons are required to make a rough ashlar as their first test piece and then later produce a perfect ashlar. And it is interesting to note how everyday speech includes such phrases as on the level and square dealing, all of which refer to honesty in everyday transactions. And there, brethren, is the completion of that very interesting demonstration, which several members of the lodge can participate in. I hope you've enjoyed it and will be looking forward to my next presentation in about a week's time. Thank you, brethren, for your very kind attention.